Why don't we go ahead and get started on some of the meeting topics while we're waiting for Stuart to join us. I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order, the July 25th, 2023 SANDAG Audit Committee meeting. It's a special meeting today. Thank you everybody for making the time to attend. Appreciate it. Before we get started, I would like to ask our interpreter to introduce themselves and walk through how to access our interpretation services for today's meeting. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andres Marquez. At this time, we will have announcements from interpreters. To use interpretation features, please scroll down to the bottom of the screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, world or sphere, and select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile, cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, the interpretation, and then choose the language. Finally, click on mute original audio. To not hear the original Spanish low in the background, headsets are available for interpretation. If you're in the meeting room, please check out our headsets from the receptionist in the lobby. Aviso por parte del intérprete. Para hacer un servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles, haga clic en el icono de interpretación, globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish o español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos y luego interpretación. Y luego el idioma. Si no desea escuchar el idioma original en inglés en el fondo, favor seleccione Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Contamos con auriculares disponibles para el servicio de interpretación. Si se encuentra en la sala de reunión, favor de pedir auriculares con la recepcionista en este vestíbulo. Gracias.
Thank you. Can we confirm that we have Mary present? Sorry. Oh, I see her on this other screen now. Thanks for joining us, Mary, remotely.
Present.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it. So with that, would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag. And just confirming with the attorney, since we do have a quorum, and since it's only a staff member that's remote, we don't have to verbally do everything today, correct? Okay. So with that, we will go ahead and move on to non-agenda public comments, which is a time to talk about items not on the agenda. Francesca, do we have any of those?
Thank you, Chair. We have no public comments on this item.
Great. With that, we now move on to the agency report, and it looks like we have Andre here to give the agency report.
Before we do that, can I just have two quick questions?
Yeah.
That would be non-agenda items. So I think it's board policy 39 3.1.5 says that the audit committee shall recommend to the board the annual compensation of the IPA. I know we've got an agenda item relating to Mary Kay's performance review, but at what point do we contemplate this and make this recommendation relating to the new IPA to be hired? That would be the first question. I don't know if you want to handle that one first.
Yeah. Again, I think that's something staff is looking into, and it's not on the agenda for today. And it's something that we have to understand how we're going to handle, but I don't believe it will actually be something we would discuss until we actually have a IPA to be that is actually hired. But I don't know, Amber, Lynn, if you'd like to address that, or if you want to wait for another time. Okay, thanks. I think that's best, but we'll
how can we hire them before giving them indication of what their compensation is going to be, right?
And as I said, we've gone through this process before. I've asked for how it worked last time, and I'm going to, continue to ask staff to bring forward how we're going to do this. We can't, there's not, at least at this point in time, another board meeting scheduled till September. So we have a long time to work through how this is going to happen from a staff perspective.
So we're having an August meeting, right?
It depends if we'll have one, if we need one.
Okay.
As of right now, there isn't any topic for the August meeting.
Because maybe this would be one, because the board has a meeting on August 28th, is it? Or there's an August board meeting, is that right?
So
the board currently does not have any meetings scheduled for the month of August.
correct. There are no meetings in the month of August right now,
Okay.
September. Anyway, so
Follow-up questions then. When will the board make a determination like who to hire as a, the new IPA? And then at that time, I agree with Stuart, the salary needs to be, determined at that time, right? So
yeah, I want to be
what's the
careful. This
timeline?
is a non-agenda item, so I don't want to get into too much debate or discussion. But just as far as reporting out, the board did interview candidates at the last board meeting, and I believe has given some direction as to what way to go from that point. I don't know if there's anything more we can say at this point. That's probably it, right, Amberlyn? And so that will be happening. I would expect this process, if it were to be done by the audit committee, it would be done with a normal type of process that we have, which is we set up a subcommittee of the audit committee to go into the details of it and then discuss their recommendation at a full meeting. But I don't know how it was handled last time, and so we'll have to go forward. I mean, that's what we're doing today. We had, thankfully, board member Wong Nickerson and Ed discussing the recommendation, which they're bringing. I believe you're ready to bring forward today for the current IPA. So I would like to move on.
Yeah. you come up with-
Yes, right. I would like to move on, and I will follow up with the information as I find out how this is going to work.
Okay, I have one other question, non-agenda question, but let me just make the last point on that. Last time around, everybody was new and nobody knew anything. And I think Mary Kay will tell you the way it resulted last time sowed the seeds for certain issues on her part. But in any case, the other thing I want to ask about is, at the March meeting, the XCOM agreed to move forward to the full board, the audit committee's unanimous recommendations for amendments to board policy 39, which included a number of improvements to the public member selection process. That's actually on the board's agenda, item number 8 for this Friday. So could you give us a little update on your conversations with leadership about the importance of having the board consider those amendments prior to this recruitment cycle?
I'm continuing to push that. I'm not sure the message is being heard. We can be, act accordingly as we want to, but that's all I can communicate. It's like, I don't have anything more to share at this point in time.
Thank you.
Yep. So with that, we'll move on to Andre's report.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee members sitting in for Ray Major today. It seems that we've been very busy here at SANDAG based on the size of this report, but it seems like a lot of positives with a lot of money coming in. So last month, we received more than $260 million from the CTC, or the California Transportation Commission, in partnership with the Port, Caltrans, and NCTD. This huge award will help us move forward on the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry, the Harbor Drive 2.0 port access improvements, and double tracking the Badagidas Lagoon Bridge. We received a $21.5 million grant from the Federal RAISE program in collaboration with the City of Chula Vista. The grant will be used to fund right-of-way acquisitions and utilities relocation on the Palomar Street Grade Separation Project. At a press conference last week, we celebrated a $10 million award from the state's REAP 2.0 Higher Impact Transformative Program, together with the City of San Diego, National Community Renaissance, and Casa Familiar. This money will be used to build mixed-use affordable housing in the South Bay community. The City of Carlsbad, led by Councilmember Burkholder, allocated $5.2 million towards eliminating the at-grade low-sand rail crossing at Carlsbad Station. We are working to get the other $20.8 million for preliminary engineering and environmental clearance on the trenching project. We reached an important milestone in the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry project. GSA and CBB both signed a memorandum of understanding with SANDAG, which means that we can move forward on the preliminary design. The 30% design phase includes setting the construction timeline and budget, strategy and logistics for project delivery, design requirements and permitting, and stakeholder identification. The amendment to AB 427 that was pursued by SANDAG and Caltrans earlier this year will allow us to use a construction manager general contractor method, a CMGC method. This method will streamline the project by providing oversight and technical expertise throughout the various stages. We partnered with Oceanside and the City of San Diego to launch 2 new neighborhood electric vehicle pilot services this month. and SANDAG received a new $100,000 grant from the California Emerging Technology Fund to advance our work closing the digital divide. The U.S. DOT's Federal Transit Administration awarded SANDAG more than $750,000 for the San Ysidro Transit Center and surrounding neighborhood. And last month, SANDAG and Facilitating Access to Coordinated Transportation launched Ride Fact Now, an open demand specialized transportation service for people who use mobility services. And during our next board meeting on July 28th, our team will present an update on the progress of the Airport Transit Connection Study. We're on the final steps of procuring a consultant for the Blue Line Express study and anticipate the work to begin next month. We recently kickstarted the Purple Line conceptual study. And we have released a supplemental environmental impact report for the proposed amendment to the 2021 regional plan. The final amendment and EIR, along with the comments and responses, will be brought back to the board for consideration at the October 27th meeting. Lastly, last month, we successfully refinanced more than $433 million in sales tax revenue bonds. We took out all the variable rate bonds, as well as the swaps associated with the 2008 variable bonds. So de-risking our portfolio, we managed to get $40 million in savings, which equates to approximately $29.5 million net present value savings. Overall, was just under a 6% savings for the portfolio. Very successful. We had over 52 investors participate in the bond sales. We were 3 times oversubscribed. So the SANDAG name remains strong out in the industry. Thank you, Chair, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Andre. Do we have any public member comments on this item?
There are no public comments on this item.
Do we have any board member comments on this item? Seeing none. We will then move to item number 3, which is update from the Office of the Independent Performance Auditor. Mary.
Hi, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to pass. There's a lot to get through today, and most of what we're going to discuss is really updates that I would provide. So I have nothing to add.
Well, appreciate that. Thanks for helping keeping the meeting moving along. And once again, I really appreciate you taking the time to attend us via Zoom. That's very helpful. Do we have any public comments on item number 3?
Thank you. No public comments.
Any board member comments on item number 3? No. With that, we'll move to item number 4, which is approval of the meeting minutes. Do we have any public comments on the meeting minutes?
There are no public comments on the minutes.
Any board members care to make a comment? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Vice Chair, second by Bob Monson. Please use your voting. Number 1 is yes, 2 is no.
That motion passes unanimously.
Oh, thank you. That's interesting. I'm looking at the wrong agenda. Sorry, I got to get into the right agenda here. Yeah, I know we're going into closed session now, and I got to get my agenda back up because my tablet says I'm unable to convert file at this point. So at this point, the item is to discuss the IPA performance evaluation, which is a closed session. Do we have any public comments on this item?
Thank you, Chair. There are no public comments on the closed session.
And Mary, I know you want to make a question or a comment, so I'll let you say something too.
Thank you, Chair. As always, every year, I work for the public. I'm a public servant and have been for almost 30 years. And I'm a big believer in transparency. So I just want to again share that I am comfortable 100% with going into an open discussion regarding my performance. I think it's important that the public knows what management, the board, and my staff see me as performing or not, and any areas that I need to improve on. So just wanted to make the statement that I am comfortable with a public discussion.
Great, I appreciate that. I do think, we'll follow the same process as last year, which is go into closed session, see if there's anything that people wanted to discuss there. And if, hopefully, I assume like last year, maybe we'll pop out of it really quickly and just have the rest of the full conversation in public. But that was that worked well last year, and it was, I checked in with the subcommittee, and that was the request to continue again this year. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So we are going to head into closed session. And I think there's some new links that have to be clicked on or something like that to make that happen. Number 6, which is the performance evaluation and compensation adjustment for the IPA. I will first start off with, are there any public comments on this item?
There are no public commenters on this item.
No public comments. So with that, I will, well, once again, I will turn this over to board member or committee member Wong Nickerson to give the report out from the subcommittee and their recommendation. But I did want to start off just by saying, once again, thanks to Mary for attending remotely and all the work that she's put in for the past year. I personally know how hard she works and the diligence she puts into it. So I think that's important to acknowledge just from the start. But with that, Agnes.
Okay, thank you. So there are really 2 components of this item. The first one is to report back the performance evaluation, the result of that. And the second piece is to discuss the compensation recommendation. So part 1, the performance evaluation, the evaluation was actually due in April. And we, Ed and I are a subcommittee members, and we looked at 2 tools to look at the performance evaluation. The first one is Mary's IPA 22-23 self evaluation that includes a list of all different goals, as well as the actual performance. And all the goals were met they were either on target or exceeded the target. The second tool that we used, we sent out a survey to approximately, it's about 20 people. 5 board members were selected based on a balanced representation from geographic perspective, and then 4 executive management members, all the committee members from last year, and also all the OIPA staff. And the final count is that we have 13 people responded to the survey. And in the survey, we have 29 questions, and they are divided into 5 different categories. The first one, we asked about the independence, objectivity, and integrity performance. And then the second component is about technical expertise in governmental auditing. The third is about the Office of the OIPA, mainly on the work plan and accomplishments. The fourth major area is about communication, ability to effectively communicate with technical and non-technical audiences. And the 5th component is about leadership and teamwork. And I'm happy to say the majority of the responses are very positive about Mary's performance. And there's a small minority that gave some, I would call it a constructive criticism or feedback, but that's very small, it's really in the minority. So overall, I would say, Mary got a very positive evaluation through this survey. That's it. That's my report on the performance evaluation. Any questions, comments?
Any other comments from committee members? Okay, well, why don't you move on to part 2 then?
Okay. And the second piece is about the compensation adjustment. So the evaluation was due in April, so any salary increase should be retroactive to April 2023. Ed and I looked at the salary recommendation, and our basis really based on several things. The first one is based on the performance evaluation, both from the self-assessment and the surveys that we talked about. The second piece is Melissa was very helpful, and she provided some additional information to me and Ed So SANDAG has a 2% COLA, I guess that has been implemented already, effective June 19th. And also, our understanding is that there's an additional 3% pool set aside for merit increase for executive management. Right now, there's no, I guess, decisions on that increase is not known until maybe September. And it's estimated that the range will be anywhere from 3 to 3.5%. And then another piece of information that we have received from, again, HR, they've been very helpful on this and very supportive. They also did a compensation comparison with all the other chief auditors positions in the San Diego region. And basically compare Mary's salary with the other chief auditors. So Mary currently has the highest salary, but very close to the auditor in the city of San Diego. And then another thing I think we should consider, the 2% COLA actually, if you compare to the inflation, is actually really not matching that, but I understand that's, how it's set right now. So Ed and I, we think that, we should recommend the 3% merit increase to Mary so that the total will be the 5%. I think that will be just basically match the inflation right now. So that's really my report. Questions, comments?
Any other comments or input?
First of all, I want to thank Mary and thank her staff for the work that they've done this year, kind of echoing the results of the survey. And so the other thing I had, just a question. So is your recommendation, it's 5%? That should be the recommended adjustment?
So yeah, 2% COLA.
2% COLA plus the 3% merit.
Yeah, so right now, just to be clear, I think she's sharing information. Their recommendation was 3%. They will also be getting a 2%. She already has a 2% COLA, although it'll be backwards. This one would actually be retroactive. I guess I would ask a question relative to your comment on getting information that, senior management would be 3 to 3.5% for merit increases this year is the typical range. And as you know, yeah, since they don't start their process till July, we don't know what the end result will be, but that's what you got. Is there, if you presume Mary's performance evaluation is good, is there a reason you wouldn't have recommended 3.5% being the top end of that range?
That would be fine too.
Okay.
Just the reason we use the 3% because the pool is 3%.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So other comments about that? Stuart.
Guess a couple of questions. One, just you referenced the salary survey in the past. I know last year, I think the chair and I I can't remember if we did exactly this as a subcommittee, but we went through this issue
There
of
was a subcommittee.
who the comps actually are. Is there any reason why, for consideration of this item, that that the full audit committee in public session couldn't see that table?
Oh, yeah, we can definitely see that too.
Yeah, that would be helpful, just because, comps for this particular position are a little tricky. And maybe while you're looking at it, if I could just throw on the table, the other question I had is, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So this 3%, 3 to 3.5%, that's the size, that's the amount of the pool that was described, right? That's
3% is the pool. Yeah.
3% of the pool. Okay. But the decisions haven't been made as to how that allocation gets made. So at this point, we don't know if the actual range will be 0 to 10%, or the range could be kind of anything, given.
I wasn't involved, so I don't know. Correct.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, sure. Andre would be willing to chime in here.
Yeah, so you're correct. There's a 2% quota that the board's approved, as well as a 3% part for not just executives, but the entire agency. And so what we do then is we are actually in the process right now, this next couple of weeks, updating our success factors. And then all that information will come back to Ray, Colleen, and I, based on the divisions that we are each in. And we try to normalize everybody's percentages. So the whole pool is 3%, but somebody could get 0% depending on where they fall. They could get up to 6 or 7% if they're on the very outstanding. But ultimately, what we have to try to do is balance that. If somebody's getting an 8% increase, somebody's getting a 0, but the average is 3. So generally, I'd say normalize the raises on average would be 3%, but some people could get 0, some people could get an 8 or 10%. But the pool that the board has allocated us is a 3% of the overall salaries for the agency.
So the 3% pool is pre-fixed already.
Correct. And let's say it's $1.6 million. So we have to allocate $1.6 million to the entire staff.
And just to do a little additional clarity, I'm assuming performance is one aspect, but where the individual sits on their pay scale would be another aspect. I mean, you're not going to give someone 8% raise just based upon performance. That would be like, oh, someone's really low on their pay scale. We need to catch them up. Is that correct? Or are there other things that you would do to catch somebody up on the pay scale as well?
So that's what we try to do, is to try and normalize it. Because if you give somebody, let's just use a number, 100,000, a 5% increase versus somebody 5% with 50,000, that 100,000 is going to keep growing a lot faster. So we put them in quartiles of how long they've been here. And we try to normalize it so that you're not just being rewarded for being at SANDAG for a long time. So really it comes down to your performance, how well you've been and how long you've been in the agency. But I think, again, you know, the 3% pool is what we're limited to. So Ray, Colleen, and I try to normalize that to make sure that everybody's kind of on a fair scale together.
Thanks.
If I could ask just, again, additional information would be helpful for me. While you're looking for that table of the comps, can we also either put up on the screen, or can somebody say what, and I appreciate the comment about the salary range, what Mary's current salary is in terms of where it sits within the range? Is she already at the high end of the range? Or
No,
is she?
Stuart, it's currently at 243. That's prior to the 2% COLA. It brought me to 245 with the COLA. The max is, I think it moves up 2%. And so it's around 260 to 262 is my top.
I think 257 is the high end of the range right now.
Yeah, that was
Is
based.
that with the COLA, Agnes, added?
Actually, that's the table I got, say fiscal year 2024 annual salary range for your position, I believe is 166 to 257. That's the range.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the 2% has been added to that yet. But I'm currently at 243 with the 2%. I'm at around 245.
Thanks for that. Now, if I could just another clarifying question about the SANDAG process broadly. Is it the case that people are kind of put into buckets of, like, you know, high performer, you know, medium performer, low performer, and then, you know, for example, all high performers would get something more than the 3% unless there's some weird, you know, salary range issue? You're nodding, is that?
Yes. So generally there's 4 categories. We put staff in from underperforming to outstanding. Generally, if you're in the second bucket, you're doing your job, and everybody within that range is generally getting the 3%. Anybody who's in the grade a little bit above that and outstanding is getting more than the 3%, and anybody who's underperforming is not getting anything. So, but generally I would say that maybe 60% of the staff fall in, you know, doing their job adequately. And maybe it's even higher than that, but it's not really a bell curve. I'd say most staff are fitting inside that. You're coming to your job and you're doing it adequately, you're doing it well.
Got it. Well, you know, I appreciate all the work that's been done here. The only thing that I guess the way I think about these kinds of things is that hypothetically, if a, you know, better than average performer in amongst the SANDAG group gets a 4% raise, I'm just making this up for illustration, then I think the performance review would suggest that at a minimum, Mary Kay's performance is, you know, better than average, right? It just seems like there's a little bit of an inequity of deciding on a number before we know where the SANDAG pool distribution is.
Yeah, well, we're kind of stuck with that. Keep in mind, we were supposed to do this in April 5th. So normally we would be stuck
No, I guess my point
without
is,
that information.
I
So
guess
we
my
just,
point is, and I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I guess just conceptually, the way I think about it is, if she would be deemed to be an above average performer or a high performer, I guess I would be more comfortable saying, give her the increase to be determined based on what SANDAG decides that high performers get. Recognizing it, we don't know that number right now, but to me, that's the most equitable thing. So just want to throw that out there.
any other comments?
That actually varies. So one director could say that this individual is a high performer and deserves 5%, while the other director could say this individual is a high performer, so we want to give him 4%. So it's really based on the individual director and their justification for, someone who's doing exceptionally well. So there's a lot more to it than just that.
Yeah. So to move beyond this, I mean, just Mary, you said your current compensation is 243, or is it 243? It's around 243, right?
It's 243 prior to the COLA, yes.
Prior to the COLA, yes. I mean, just doing the math, I mean, Stuart, if I'm hearing you, you're arguing that maybe 4% is more representative, or a higher percentage would be more representative. But let me just doing the math, if we were to assume a 4% raise followed by a 2% COLA, that would put her very close to 258, which is over last year's cap. I think Mary's right. It would actually still probably be a little bit below this year's cap after the 2% COLA, but it would put her almost right at the high end of her bracket. So if we were all just to settle on, say, a 4% recommendation, then realistically, that's recognized her as being above the average performer, and also puts her really close to the top of her pay scale.
Okay, no,
Being fair.
I hear you. I understand the
Yeah.
pay scale has
Yeah.
got to come into this as
Yeah.
a boundary. All I'm saying, I guess if it were me and you tell me on the one hand, you're a high performer, but your raise is going to be less than other high performers, I would feel like that's a little less than fair. I'm just trying to do that apples to apples type thing. But I hear you. If we're bound by the upper limit, then that's got to be taken in consideration as well.
I think my preference is more bound by making an actual decision today, which is what I would like to do, and then move beyond it. So regardless, some point we have to have an opinion and emotion. So being the chair, I won't try to force a motion yet, but if nobody else wants to make a motion, then I will go ahead and do so on this.
So I understand what Stuart is saying. I guess that's where I'm struggling at right now, is that we don't know what. It's obvious from the performance review that we have a high performer, and she's been very consistent, not just this last year, but in years prior to. She's a high performer. So I definitely think that if we land on a number, it can't be 3%. I don't even think 3.5%. 4% I could probably live with. But I guess my other point is, I don't know what other percentages other high performers outside of the IPA, what they're going to be given. And that's why I'm hesitant to sit on a number. I guess if I'm forced to, it's going to be 4% at least.
Yeah, and I think
Even though
that
I understand that will put her over the limit, over her salary limit.
I don't think it will for this upcoming fiscal year. It'll just be very close. I'm not having exact data in front of me, but I'm believing what Mary's saying, which is the 257 number was probably last year's number and should have been adjusted 2% for the COLA, unless Amberling, you're going to jump in.
I would just reference the board adopted its budget, which included salary ranges. And so I would reference the salary range tables that were adopted on May 12th, which have an effective date of June 19th of this year.
Okay.
And it's reflecting that the high end range for the independent performance auditor is 257,697.
Okay, so that is the number. And so if we were to make a 4% recommendation, which I'm comfortable with, we just need to acknowledge that's going close to $1,000 over the top of the current range. Which, again, relative to the point that you just discussed, Bob, I can pretty much assure you wouldn't be done for other employees. So I think we're treating her well relative to the other senior management in that regard.
So
Yeah.
does our recommendation final or does it go to the board?
It goes to the board.
I also have a table that I'm happy to share, if you're ready for that. So, this is the different agencies: San Diego, City of San Diego, County of San Diego, Port of San Diego, Airport, and SANDAG. Oh, you're trying to make it bigger. Thank you. Is it better? Okay. So the first page is more information about the position, right? And the reporting relationship, the budget of the agency, the audit department budget, size of the audit team. And the next page shows the annual salary range, the current salary reported, tenure of incumbent, and the term of the contract.
Yeah, just point of information, when we did this in the past, we took the County of San Diego auditor off. I know Tracy well, love her, but it's not a comparable position.
I would like to make a comment too, if I can, Chair. We've seen this before, and Stuart actually counteracted this with the fact that some of these are not relevant because of the responsibilities and such that SANDAG has and the types of audits we do compared to these auditors. But the relevance here, I'm sharing that I don't believe it's relevant because I already am at a compensation level. I'm already ranked. I have a maximum and a minimum, which is what this is used for, is to identify the maximum and minimum, which has already been done. And so I understand I cannot get above that maximum, but to me, this slide is not relevant.
Yeah, well, now that we know what it is, I think it answers Stuart's question. So thanks for putting it up there. Yeah, relative to the discussion, as I said, Bob, that you were bringing up, is I want to be sensitive to, Mary's request and need to have everything enter correctly into calculations. And if we want the information that we're talking about, that will delay the increase beyond that point. And I think that's problematic for calculations as part of a retirement. So with that, since we seem to be stuck, I would just simply go ahead and make a motion that we adopt a 4% raise for Mary. That is as of April 5th, which I believe is her anniversary date of this year. And then she will have the 2% applied on top of that as part of the COLA as well. So that's my motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Bob. Any other further discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Okay, Francesca isn't going to do it this time. That motion passes unanimously. I don't know whether I'm expected to. And yeah, so as we close off of this topic, again, I just would like to, since this is, I would assume, Mary's last performance evaluation, I would like to once again express my thanks for the amount of effort and time that she's put into trying to make this a office that's working. And I think all of us can personally express that I either she has a very good chat bot out there working on her behalf, or she just doesn't sleep, because no matter when I bug her, she responds immediately, and it's kind of scary that way. But I thank her for her diligence and effort and all in the year she's been with the agency. But
Thank you.
we are rapidly running out of time with a full agenda, so I would like to move on unless anybody else needed to say something, and we will go on to item number 7. which is the fourth quarter fraud waste. No, am I on the right agenda again? Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Report. Mary.
Thank you, Chair. So there's not a lot of changes. It's pretty much the same. We have a couple investigations that are nearing the end, which is good news. But for this period, we have still 7 external cases that remain open and 1 pending open internal case. And as I shared last time, I initially closed this matter and thought that HR was going to be managing it. But it has since come back to me. So it is the one that was added as an internal case. So with that, there is nothing further on this item.
Do we have any public member comments on this item?
Thank you, Chair. We have no public comments on this item.
Do we have any? Yes, Stuart.
Quick question. Could you refresh our memories? Is one of the staff currently doing the training to get a certified fraud examiner authorization or some?
There are 2 actually. So the one class and examination was to be in LA, but it was booked and we weren't able to get in it. So now they are officially, 2 of them are officially enrolled in the November class and exam. So hopefully in November, we will have 2 CFEs on staff.
With that, no further comments. I'd entertain a motion to forward this to the board.
I motion that this report be
Moved by Monson, second by Drucker. Please vote. Bob, yours didn't take. There we go. That motion passes unanimously. We'll now move on to item number 8, which is the OIPA performance summary of audits, recommendations, and status of corrective action plans for 2023.
Thank you, Chair. So this is going to be a real quick item as well. We basically had only 1 red dot, which meant that it was overdue and not being addressed on a timely manner. And we checked into that and identified that the city of Lemon Grove basically under collected on $129.15. And they've determined that they are going to absorb that through their general fund. So that finding is really not material and it's going to be removed.
Okay. That was short. Francesca, any public comment?
We have no public comments on this item.
Any other board member or committee member comments or requests? I will just make a comment that I find this I mean, Mary knows this because I was actually asking where it was a month ago, I think, because I was eager to see it. I just find this thing very useful, this report very useful. And thanks to the OIPA staff for doing it. I don't know that if it's actually technically part of your responsibility, but it actually is incredibly useful and very helpful to understand what's going on. I do think that I think the staff actually does this, but it's a little bit unfortunate. It only happens once a year. I don't want to make you create the report more than once a year. I would just want to make sure that if we know things aren't on track, I just hope they get brought to the committee sooner than waiting for the annual report, which I believe your staff would do, but that's just another comment I'll make there.
Yeah, so Chair Zito, on that, just to remind everybody that this is just an annual report of the whole everything, including outside audits, then OPA. But as a reminder, we are doing this on a quarterly basis. We're reaching out and we're updating the corrective action sheet. And in addition to that, any corrective action plan that's handled and managed as a result of OPA's audits, that is looked at quarterly. And when management has implemented and updated their CAP on a quarterly basis, then that does both from my review and management's reporting come to the audit committee on a quarterly basis, as well as go to the board. There just hasn't been any corrective action plans yet updated from the contracts and procurement audit, basically, that's reportable at this time.
Very good. So if there are no other comments, I'd entertain a motion to forward this report to the board.
Recommend.
Moved by Monson,
Second.
second by Halpern. Please vote. That motion passes unanimously. And with that, we're now on to item number 9, which is annual risk discussion recommendation. And I will turn this over to Mary as well. And hopefully you can give us a little bit of detail about what you found with your board member discussions and any recommendations coming out of that.
Sure, absolutely. So every year, as everybody's aware, I have an annual risk discussion with members of management, usually the executive team, all the primary voters, and some second primary board members, all the audit committee members. And the reason for this is to, you don't know what you don't know. So having those discussions really brings everything up to identifying additional audit risks that I was unaware of, or just having general discussions about risk management, because as everyone should be aware, risk mitigation and risk maintenance and identification of even risk is management's responsibility. So auditors have it from an audit perspective and management has it from a management's perspective, and it's really up to management to be having these annual risk discussions as well. As the governing board, the board should be basically setting a risk tolerance and having an annual discussion with management about what, where they're tolerant of risk and not beyond, and if it is, how mitigation occurs. So it's kind of a joint effort that should be occurring on an annual basis, and the management should also and is also responsible. And if you refer to board policy 42, internal control standards, that's the board policy, it talks about the responsibilities of risk management with managers and with the staff and what that looks like. And so hopefully what came out of these discussions is a refresher. I sent a lot of board members board policy 42 because they weren't aware of it, shared with them to help them understand whose responsibility it is overall for risk management. So with that, I interviewed and had either anywhere from 30 minutes is what I set it up to be, but some of them extended to about 2 hours, which I felt was very impressive for board members to give that kind of time and to be that involved and care that much about SANDAG and the risk associated with it, that many of them went almost 2 hours, some of them even more, into discussions around risk and understanding risk. So I thought that was very impressive. Audit committee members, of course, I had discussions with all of you, and as a result, there's a lot of input and sharing that goes into that. And then from the board member, all but one board member participated this year, which I thought was outstanding. Of course, as every year, all audit committee members participated, and 6 executive members were invited to participate, with 3 actually participating. So 3 did not participate. And I will just mention, because Andre is sitting over there, that he was actually the first one right away to reach out and set a meeting with me. So it shows that he does understand and has concerns about risk and cares about that aspect of it as well. So it was a really good turnout. As a result, I do this every year. I typically don't formalize it in a report, though I have it thoroughly documented, the process and the results of every discussion. I don't typically consolidate and summarize it. I felt it was important to do it my last year, because it's going to be helpful for the IPA that's taking over and help them kind of give an understanding around risk, because really from an audit perspective, risk is where we start, and it's where we build our plan. It's how we mitigate around it from an audit perspective, and it's how we identify where there's control weaknesses, because typically where you find a high risk, you find very, very poor controls. So they really go hand in hand. So as a result, though there were many risks identified from an audit perspective, I identified what was consistent either with a majority of the board members or with management, or from an audit perspective, 8 risk items. that rose to the top that I felt was important to address and move forward to the audit committee and then to the board. So the following are the 8 that I identified, either from discussion or just from an audit perspective. So the first one was contracts and purchase cards, risk identified in reports, assuring that continuous auditing is done was one of the top areas of concern for board members. And of course, from an audit perspective, we identified it as being very high up there on the risk poll. The next was the audit committee and OPA having an independent legal support. This rose with a lot of concerns with not just audit committee members, but also some board members. And for myself as the IPA, I think it's very important at this time we lack having an independent legal support and legal counsel. Though I don't see it necessary at every single meeting, I think it's important that when we talk about audit findings, many of the findings are around policies. Policies are approved and really start at the top, and that's with the general counsel, which is under our audit preview. Therefore, I think it's important for those types of discussion when we're having a finding around a policy or not agreeing with the interpretation of counsel around a policy or around federal or state legalities, that we, going back to the same legal that created the policy and supported their opinion on it, is kind of not independent, and it really is going to the same that we have the finding on. So I think it's important that that we at the audit committee level and then move it up to the board, discuss having the ability to, when under those circumstances, having an independent body, an independent counsel that we can reference and go to for those interpretations, just for a second perspective on it, is important. And I think that it's important that that individual should be basically a independent from SANDAG, not having done anything on management side for SANDAG. And that RFP process should be really handled by the audit committee and then moved to the full board. The next is the general counsel's reporting structure in general. We're talking, this was something that was brought up by several board members, not feeling that the general counsel currently reports to management, to Hassan, the CEO. Therefore, the true independence, you're getting both, and we again have to remember, we're not talking about a person in the position, we're talking about a position. Looking at that position, typically in other agencies, including the city of San Diego, the general counsel, as well as at the port, reports directly to the board. And so that is the recommendation that the general counsel should move to full reporting, both functionally and administratively, to the board, just as I do, just as Hassan does, to assure complete independence. The next one was management and board annual risk tolerance discussion. So in discussions with the board and with some members of management, there really isn't a documented process, though several of the board members felt that there may be some risk discussions that go on periodically through the discussions around projects that are coming to the board and such. There is no general discussion. And again, management's responsibility around risk is to both identify and have a risk discussion on an annual basis, monitor those risks, and then also understand from the governing board what the risk tolerance is. So again, management, many of the members of management and even many of the board members shared that they don't really see that there's ever been that annual risk discussion where they're talking about what the tolerance level from a board perspective should be. So around that, my recommendation would be that there be a documented annual risk discussion set up with board members and management to have that thorough discussion around what the risk tolerance would be overall for the organization. The next one was management's consideration of risk monitoring and mitigation. Again, that is something that in discussions with management, they felt that they always kind of consider risk in everything they do, which is a natural progression of what you would do, but it's not really documented. And again, it's required that you monitor and document and mitigate risks. So if you don't document it, you don't really know all the risks that are out there, and you can't possibly manage them all. So again, the recommendation is that management consider on an annual basis, at least consider the overall risk of the organization, especially around major projects, and identify how they're going to monitor and mitigate those risks. And again, this may be being done. It's just not documented. And that's really what's required, especially around federal money, around federal grant money. It's required that you mitigate and you monitor and you document that around risk. The next one is risk management position. I've spoken with Hassan and the deputy CEO several times about this. For an organization this size and for the amount of inherent high risk projects that are involved, as well as the audits that we've come up with, we have no formal risk manager on staff. It really should be a risk manager who kind of gathers all the risk identified and monitors and manages those on an ongoing basis. That position naturally should be reporting at the highest level, which would be at Hassan's level. And they're there to really mitigate and catch risk and identify them before they turn red or hit fire. So that's a recommendation. The next is the organization of board materials. This is really something that almost all the board members shared concerns around. They feel that there's a lot of information. Many of them don't have the staff or time to go through all the information. A lot of them shared that it's gotten better over the last few years, definitely, but they expressed that they would really like to see, there's a lot of information, but the way it's organized is somewhat disorganized. And what they shared is they'd like to sort of see a one-page summary of options. So right now, from the speaking with them, they're really given an option that was decided on management rather than sharing from management what were the options, why did they determine those weren't good options, and why did they select the option that they selected. And also the risk associated with the option that they selected and how they intend to mitigate that risk. So the summary should be attached to each project so that these board members are able to go back to those projects and follow them along and recall, oh, these were the risks and how are they continually being mitigated and managed. So it's a recommendation that maybe working with a few of the board members as a subcommittee or something in management, having that discussion on coming up with somewhat of a fact sheet or a summary sheet that can provide what the options were, why you selected the option you had, and what are the risks that are still there and how they're being mitigated. And then the next one would be the last one would be the small city risk of representation. This was, again, a large percentage of the board members shared their concerns around the weighted vote. And, there's not a lot that I can recommend here. And it was difficult for me to have the discussion. When you have something in law, it really needs to be changed only through law. And so the only recommendation I had here, and the concern was several members shared that due to the use of weighted vote in accordance with AB 805, many of the smaller cities have inadequate or unfair representation. Currently, should the weighted vote be called, the vote of the city, the county, the city of San Diego, the county, and one more stands regardless of the voting results of 16 other members. A lot of them shared this concern, and my recommendation was either try to change the statute, which is really ultimately the way to go if it's possible, or you could have a board policy, and that's sort of like a gentleman's handshake, right? Board policy, the law still overrules the board policy, but the board policy could sort of be somewhat of a gentleman's handshake that says, here's when we would use the weighted vote. And at least there would be some kind of, joining of understandings in a cooperative overall manner versus just 3 members. And with that, that's it. That concludes the 8 identified and the recommendations around that. This will also be at the request to be moved to the board.
Thank you, Mary. Francesca, any public comments?
Thank you, Chair. We have no public comments on this item.
Anybody care to kick off with any committee member comments? Bob?
Yeah, thank you, Mary, for putting this together. Well done. And I appreciate the summary that you have put together as well. Just a couple of questions. And this first one is just really a clarification. And just, I kind of want to make sure that everybody understands. I think everybody here understands it. When we talk about a risk manager, I know when I was at the port had a risk manager, but it basically concentrated on insurance. Here, you're talking about something very different.
Yes,
And I believe it's the enterprise risk management is really what you're talking about.
yes.
Okay, all right.
Absolutely. You nailed it, Bob. And, this agency has a high amount of risk, inherent risk, and a lot of large size, over many years, contracts and projects. And for that, it's important that they have a high level risk manager that kind of looks at risk from a totality, from an organizational perspective. And that would include insurance risk. But yes, it would be much larger than just the typical agencies that will have a risk manager that just mitigates on insurance and workman's comp and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you. My other question, you mentioned that you have your 8 common risks that kept coming up in your interviews. But you also indicated that there were other risks that were brought up during these interviews. How do those risks get addressed in your audit plan? I know you're addressing the contracts and P cards, the continuous auditing, but does your audit plan address these other risks that were brought up? And how will the audit committee be able to see that that's the risk that's being addressed through?
Sure. Thank you, Bob. So the other risks, yes, the other risks that I believed were risks that could be managed from an audit perspective were included in the next year's plan. And for example, one of those was timekeeping, the use of making sure that employees are claiming their time off. And so I included an audit around timekeeping. Another was reimbursement, employee reimbursement, and assuring that employees are adhering to the new travel laws, the travel plan and the policy. So that's included in there. So those are risks that are auditable and can be mitigated through audits. There are other risks that just are not within the capability of OPA, measuring the amount of pollution, for example, around a certain area. I mean, that's something that's a niche and a specialty that isn't within the ability of OPA to audit. So that's the other types of risks that were discussed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Agnes, go ahead.
I do have a follow-up question on the enterprise risk manager position. You particularly highlight that, HR related matters should be included in this area. Is there a particular reason why you point out HR specifically? Are there issues or concerns that you have identified?
So there are a few times, several times that, and employees should feel that they can have an independent ear, that employees have come to me as an independent body seeking advice and guidance and even review. And I try to sway away from that because typically in the state organizations, you have an EAP officer, someone who's separate and away from HR. So when matters of HR come about and an employee doesn't agree with the determination by HR, they can go to this independent body that's separate from HR and separate from management that has this, ability to do investigations and reviews. So that's why you could combine those two, EAP officer and a risk manager together that handles both those types because they're both really risk, right? It's mitigating risk, one from a personnel standpoint. But yes, there are a couple that rose to the level for me to review it. One was in this report that I just reported to you was abuse of authority, HR matter, but really it's something that should be independently managed, but I'm not so sure it should come to the OPA.
I see. Okay, thank you. So really more things like employee grievances, labor relations,
Yes,
things that currently it's not a good place
yes,
to go to. Okay.
absolutely.
Stuart?
I've got two process questions. I guess maybe one's a comment. First, appreciate the work. Let me add a third. Again, I hope somebody does a shout out to the board, thanking everybody, because getting virtual 100% participation in the board is really fabulous. And, compared to where we were a few years ago, especially, but, they should really be thanked for that participation. I have to say, as much as I appreciate this work, and I can't recall if you two guys have another year on your term, so you'll be around for the next time this is done. I mean, the three of us, two of us won't, Agnes may, but I think from an institutional knowledge standpoint, I think this would be a valuable discussion to have before we and the board actually approve the audit plan. Because in my mind, the audit plan should flow from the risk assessment. And I know, Mary, when you did the audit plan, you had taken that into account. But from a public process standpoint, I think it would actually work if we flip these, if you get what I mean, right? That this should be a prelude to then being more informed as a committee and then ultimately the board about what we're voting on for the audit plan. And Bob kind of touched on this in his comment. So that's really a comment. The other thing, I'm just curious from a process standpoint, if we approve this to be forwarded to the board, does that, well, let me express it as more of a comment also. I think the issues that you raised and the recommendations require a lot more discussion than we'll have here. So from a process standpoint, if we recommend to forward this to the board, I would hope that that doesn't imply that we're agreeing at this point with all those recommendations. I think there just needs to be more substantive discussion about those issues and recommendations before at least I would say that, I would want to say that the committee is endorsing each one of those. And that's no disrespect to the recommendations, right? But more typically, each of those issues would almost be like its own audit, and you'd have a lot more depth about the finding as well as the recommendation. So maybe if you could clarify from a process standpoint, if we approve this, you're sort of smiling. You're not exactly sure how to position this?
So Stuart, just let me, before Chair Zito shares his, I just want to share something. Typically, a risk report that I provided is not done. It's something that as auditors, we're required to do in planning our annual plan. We document our process, we have the risk discussions, we consider other risk from an audit perspective, and then we prepare our annual plan. So it's sort of all done in the background. It's not typically a risk result that comes forward like this one. This is the first year I've ever done this. So it's all kind of done prior to the audit plan, with the understanding that you've had those discussions with audit committee members about risk, and all of this together is considered as an auditor. It's our responsibility to then form the annual plan, which incorporates all of those concerns if they're from an audit perspective at a level of risk that we should audit based on our resources and capabilities. And then we bring the plan forward and we have that discussion with you. This report I felt was necessary just because I'm leaving, and I wanted to leave the IPA with something, again, some type of concession or information that person can move forward with, knowing that it's a helpful tool for them. And so that's why I brought this forward. So the recommendations are not recommendations I'm asking anyone to agree or disagree on. They're simply recommendations from my audit perspective for consideration. And so this isn't a finding and recommendation audit. This is not an audit under GAGAS or anything like that. It's just something that I formalized that is something that auditors do when they're preparing their plan.
Got it. Well, I appreciate the clarification. Maybe just change the word recommendation to like a for-your consideration, because at least when I come in from an audit perspective, I'm immediately thinking of, finding recommendation in an audit context. So maybe she's answered that and there's no need for you to.
Well, no, and I do think we need to talk about it a little bit from that perspective, because to answer your question, I can tell you as a board member, if we voted on this and voted to send it forward to the board, that will be implicitly viewed as, yes, we support all of these recommendations and feel they should be implemented as soon as we can. So we should consider adding some language or asking some language to be included in there saying that, these are the OIPA recommendations and the audit committee intends to take up or, discuss individual ones in more detail to form their own recommendations or something like that. I also wanted to note that the one question I had, largely because, well, I'll start out with a comment, which is, and it's going to be a very odd comment for me to make because for people who know me, I'm very passionate about my opposition of the use of the weighted vote, and I've spoken up against it often. But I can tell you, at least with respect to a good amount of the board, not the majority, but a good amount of the board, if they see number 8 in there, the rest of their whole report is just going to get thrown out, right? They're just going to say, blah, blah, blah. And it almost makes me wonder if we shouldn't be making a recommendation and should only be acknowledging that the majority of the board members brought this up as a concern, unless we can actually identify real auditing related things that are an issue with respect to that, because as we all know, it is the law. It doesn't mean I like it, doesn't mean that other people like it. It is also at this point, by and large, a political discussion, I think, and I'm worried by bringing a recommendation forward from this body, it's going to make this body look political as opposed to auditing type, unless there's a very specific thing we can point back to, because it is such a hot topic. And I would really prefer to keep us out of the politics if possible, even though, as I said, I'm personally very passionate about this because I think it's been one of the biggest challenges with SANDAG over the past 5 or 6 years is the fact that this exists, the weighted vote mechanism. But I wanted to put that out there too, just from the perspective of trying to make sure that the other really good material in here doesn't get lost and overshadowed by us making a recommendation being made about something that's going to be viewed as a very highly politically charged topic.
Well, Chair Zito, just some information. This actually is going to the board as a consent item for information. It's not asking the board to accept. It's not asking the board for action. It's really just the results of the risk discussion. And that's what it states on the title, is just the results of the risk discussion. And when you get to that, I agree with you about the weighted vote, which is why I have it as number 8. And I do put in there that members should seek amendment to AB 805 or have this gentleman's agreement, and that really that's the law. And there's not a whole lot that can be done unless the law is changed. So I don't think that it in any way would be something that the audit committee would agree or disagree with. It's simply, it's the law, and the law has to be changed, or you can have a gentleman's agreement, and not much more than that. But I'm happy to add additional language. I think if you read the entire report, you'll see that it's basically a process that's done annually. And the results of the highest 8 that I identified that are relevant from an audit perspective, and then some recommendations around that.
Stuart, you were going to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to say I share your concerns. So Mary, I appreciate your offer about some language. I really do think you need to avoid language that makes it look like a formal recommendation, as if there was an audit done and a recommendation from the auditor, because I share the chair's concern. And even if it's a consent item, people can pull it off. And so I don't know. The other thing would be that whenever it's presented, one of the chair or the vice chair could be sure to be there and provide it the proper context. But even then, some members going to read this in the isolation without the introduction to the chair and vice chair. So I think the framing of this is going to be really important exactly for the reasons that the chair described. Thanks.
David?
So that was where I was going with my comments, which is what is the framework for this? And I would go back to the circles of control, circles of concern, influence, and circle of concern. And some of these we have, the auditor, we as a committee have control over, which is the contracts and purchase cards. We can work on that. The audit committee and OIPA independent legal support, we have some control over that. We have concern, I would say, over the general counsel reporting structure. We may even have some influence. I think the major thing here is this risk, which we want to have a whole lot of influence over, because that is something that you, Mary, are finding as a whole in terms of the way SANDAG works, and we want to have a whole lot of influence over that. The organization of board material, again, we have concern, maybe a little influence. The small risk, small city risk of representation, I think that's again a concern. We have we as an audit committee should not have a whole lot of influence over that. We have concern over that. Mary's found out there is concern about that. We know that as board members, SANDAG board members, there's a whole lot of concern about it, but we shouldn't be weighing in on that in terms of we want to influence it or control it or something like that. So if we could, so does that make sense in terms of what we should be doing with this?
I'm happy to pull it from the consent item. This was supposed to be heard last week, and so it was supposed to be on a consent for this Friday. So I'll have to have Crystal and Lloyd pull it. And I'm happy to add additional verbiage, but it's clearly not an audit report. If it was an audit report, it would state audit report on the title, and it would also say that I'm following GAGAS. It basically states that it's an annual risk assessment. It goes into quite a lot of detail of what that entails and the process and the results. And it then further identifies the auditor's recommendation, not the audit committee's recommendation. And so I can add language in there that says this is the auditor's recommendations for consideration. I could remove the word recommendation and put for consideration, and that this is not the audit committee's recommendation. We can put language in there, but it really is clearly stated what it is, what the purpose of it is, and that it's the auditor's recommendations around certain risks that were identified from an audit perspective.
Yeah, thanks. Agnes?
And I agree with that. I feel like, these are very good, interesting things that we should explore. I feel like I don't have enough information on some of these items to really say that, I support it or not. I mean, they all conceptually looks good. Like, for example, hiring a enterprise risk management, but I don't know exactly what it entails and what does that really mean. It feels like, I don't know if this is this group's scope of work, or if so, we need to spend a little more time on it. But I do like the way you frame it, that, these are your observations, what you've learned from talking to the board members. So you're summarizing, these observations, and that, probably some committee, maybe audit committee or whoever is appropriate should, look into this more, because I think these are good idea items. I just don't know what's the next step, appropriate place to address them.
Yeah, so having that language, but then I'll also state, and Mary, I hear you, and having an engineering analytical background, I would like to think that the world all worked that way, but it doesn't. And one thing that I know is if this goes out with anything like what's in recommendation number 8, you are going to hear a board member on the news saying the auditor and the audit committee recommends that we change AB 805 in the weighted vote. And that's not going to do us any good. It will be really bad for the audit function in this organization. So I do think it's our responsibility to forward that this was brought up by the majority of the board members, but I would prefer that we stay out of the business of making a recommendation unless we can, and strongly suggest it unless we can tie it back to something concrete that is in the core scope of the auditing function of the organization. Because I just really worry about the health of this committee and the team by stepping into those politics. There, David?
Has this already been sent out to the board because it's on consent calendar?
That I don't know.
Yes, it's already been published with the board's agenda for
Woohoo.
Friday.
Yes, so I just told Crystal to reach out and have it pulled.
Okay. That's probably, well, I mean, it's out there, but at least, I don't know.
I think, again, it would make sense to kind of divide these into there's concerns versus this is what the audit committee has some type, would like to pursue.
Well, again, at this point, there's nothing in there that states the audit committee accepts it, recommends it. It's a consent item for information. It doesn't say that the audit committee agrees or disagrees. I can add language that says this is not a recommendation from the audit committee, or whatever language that you want to add, and then we could put it in for September.
Right.
The agenda item says, if recommended by the audit committee, the report will be provided to the board as information in July or September. So we thought.
Exactly. So that's exactly how it went as information. The thing is that it was supposed to happen before the next meeting, and we didn't get that discussion done. So now we're here, and so it's already went out. So we'll have to pull the item.
Right. At this point in time, we haven't made a motion to forward it to the board, so it can be stated that this hasn't happened yet, even though the information is out there. Stuart.
So, Mary, just let me ask you a question. Would you be comfortable that you're fulfilling your, hesitate to use the word obligation, but that you're fulfilling your duty by informing the board of what you were hearing from the board about during these risk interviews, but that you don't necessarily need to add your recommendations to fulfill your, sense of obligation, right?
No, auditors typically don't just leave that part hanging. So auditors typically identify a risk and say, here's how you can potentially fix that risk. And so that's the process that I did in this summary. Which is why I haven't done these summaries, is exactly this, because it's really an unofficial process that's documented by us auditors, but not typically shared. And I shared it because I was trying to, on an outgoing basis, help provide information in general. And because it was requested that I share this information that I hadn't shared in the past by members of the audit committee. So probably wasn't a good idea.
To your point, though, I mean, we could go further. It's just a recommendation that I would be inclined to see is a recommendation more along the lines of the board should know that this concern is out there from the majority of the members and needs to take steps that they identify to make sure everybody feel like their voices are being heard.
Well, and that's sort of what's in the report, Chair.
The recommendation specifically says advocate to change AB 805.
No, the recommendation says that it's law, and the only way you can change law is through law.
Well, but to your point about the problem with what you diplomatically call the organization of board materials, the problem is you're assuming that people actually read everything and that they have the time to understand it in the context in which you wrote it, which I have to say, with great respect to the challenge of being a board member and the earnest effort people make, I just don't think happens typically. So that's the problem. They see something from the auditor, they see the word recommendation, their mind is going to shortcut it that a lot of the people won't differentiate between what's an official audit report, whether it says according to GAGAS. They see a piece of paper, a document from the auditor making a recommendation. And I just think that, to your point, to the extent this is quote unquote informal, let's not buy ourselves those kinds of problems and potential headaches.
Well, I'm like I said, I'm happy to pull it, and this was sort of a request from some of the audit committee members that they wanted it documented and brought forward. It's a process that's done annually, every year. It does say this was a risk assessment process. It goes into detail what that entails. Recommendations followed it because you typically, as an auditor, don't leave things hanging. But you know, we can definitely pull it. I can add language to it, or I can do what I've done in the past and just not bring it forward.
Well, since it's out there, I mean, I'm happy to hear other people's points of view. I mean, my inclination right now would be to pull it, ask you to make some of the language changes that we've talked about, and then bring it back to at the next audit committee meeting for our consideration to forward. I mean, people know about it. We're going to have to send something to the board because they'll want to talk about it. But I think that, you know, we at least at this point in time have a defense of saying we were just trying to make things work efficiently and got ahead of ourselves with respect to publishing an agenda item because we needed to talk about it here first. So that's my thought, but would be, yeah, to go ahead and pull it, have you bring it back at the next meeting with some of the language changes that say, hey, these are areas that the OIPA thinks should be worked on. This is our recommendation. The audit committee is going to make some further, take some further look at some of these, and then maybe some changes to the language of exactly the recommendation in item number 8 to say, this is a risk area the board needs to work on making sure people feel included or something like that, as opposed to telling them, making specific recommendations of how they could fix it, saying that you could fix it by taking steps to make them feel included. Anyway, other thoughts, Bob?
Not a whole lot different from what you've mentioned, other than I still think this is a really good summary, but Mary's correct. I mean, typically you don't really, an auditor, when you do these risk assessments, you do it all the time at the port. I never published the results of that risk assessment. It never became public. But it was certainly something that was included as a part of my audit plan.
Mm-hmm.
Plan and the events in that audit plan tied to those risk assessments. Now, if something came out in those risk assessments that it was outside the scope of the audit, but it is something that the board needed to be aware of, then I report that out to them. Again, the longer I've stayed on this committee and been related to SANDAG, the more I become aware the port is a whole lot different than the SANDAG. A totally different animal. I agree with everybody here on the committee, Mary, is that, and I appreciate you pulling it. I do think some of the language needs to be changed, making it very clear that some of these, the audit committee does have some control over. I can see that number 8 becoming a big flashpoint with the board. And again, I'm sitting here trying to think how can we, because it was certainly something that came up in your discussions.
Probably with all but, probably Stuart or Bob, with all but maybe 4 members brought that matter up, which is why I then felt compelled to include it.
It's an important, but again, I just think that it needs to be very clear. The audit committee isn't recommending it. And to a certain extent, the IPA really isn't recommending it. It's just simply something that needs to be stated, that the board needs to really address. Because as you said, Mary, most of all the board members, with the exception of 4, had
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what I'm kind of agreeing. I appreciate you pulling it, but I
Mhm.
think we need to go back and maybe relook at that report.
Well, I'll just add I can add some additional language to make it clear that it's not a recommendation from the audit committee, nor is it a audit type recommendation from the IPA. It's for consideration and potential consideration and discussion amongst board members, which is what I had intended to say, because I will be there if there's questions to be asked. I could have clarified that this isn't an audit committee recommendation, it's the IPA's recommendation, and it's more of a consideration, because as you can see in the report, it's not an audit. It's not about a finding and a recommendation. It's simply items that were brought up in a majority.
Yeah, I think the way that you've stated it, Mary, is I think the way it should be stated very clearly in the report.
Mhm.
Nobody, be that on the board, be that out in the public, will be mistaken as to exactly what you're saying.
So sounds good. So yeah, I think that I appreciate the feedback. So we'll have it pulled. You'll add some additional language and then we'll look at it again after that language has been added, just to make sure we're comfortable, or if we feel like further tweaks are needed. Agnes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. One before I forgot, I'll keep that thought. I've been meaning to say this. I keep forgetting about it, but the other thing that's important is to be accurate, and maybe our attorney can let me know, but my recollection is that actually for the weighted vote to take effect, there needs to be 4 jurisdictions that have to be in the weighted vote can be called with only 2 jurisdictions, but for it to actually succeed, there has to be 4 in AB 805. And I just want to make sure we're accurate in the representation as well, because the staff report in here says any 3 board members, and I think it actually takes 4. But maybe you can clarify on that.
That's correct. The language is not less than 4.
Okay, so let's make sure what we forward is correct, that it's 4 and not 3, even though I think some board members are actually incorrect in their knowledge, because clearly they're telling you 3 when it's actually.
Yeah.
But anyway, so go ahead, Agnes. I just want to make sure that gets corrected too.
I'm in agreement with, most of what you all said. And I do think it's important to share these, what you found from talking to the board members back to the board. Nothing else to encourage them next time they will participate, because
Right.
show that, you did hear them and this is what you've heard, and continue rather than offering up this recommendation or solutions. Actually, I think some of them are pretty significant item, probably requires more conversations, maybe even beyond of this group, right? So let's not recommend the solutions yet. There might be some of these issues might require more conversation before we can decide. We better define the problem and then find the right solution for them.
Okay, any other comments or thoughts on this particular item? So at this point, we'll take no action. I think Mary has sufficient feedback to know what we want to do and on this particular item. Now we do have another item, which is item number 10. I'll notice that I'm starting to get time crunched. I would like to have the conversation. I don't know how important people want to do this now, or feel we can make it maybe the first item of the next meeting that we have, so we get to it. But I'm only going to have about 5 more minutes myself before I have to go. So, and I'd like to be part of the conversation. So are folks okay pushing this one to the next, number 10 to the next meeting?
I'm personally okay pushing it as long as it is the top topic, because I do think we as an audit committee need to talk about this and have a discussion.
And I'm happy to commit to say I'll make this the first thing on the agenda at the next meeting. Are you good with that?
Is that going to be August?
I don't know yet. I'll let you know. But I said, so right now we have a meeting scheduled on August 11th at 1:30 p.m. And that's the next meeting. And so please keep that on your calendar. And then if we have to push it, we'll push it. But for now, that's the plan. Okay. With that, thank you everybody for your attendance to this meeting. It was very helpful to get caught up after our 5-hour marathon last time. And we'll see you all the next time we get together. We're adjourned.
Thank you.